The NHL is beginning to prepare for life without Gary Bettman as commissioner, and the New Jersey Devils get some bad news about their goaltending situation. We've got all that and more next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Rachel, happy Friday to you, and we are closing in on the end of January already. I can't believe how quickly this year is going by.
Yeah, we are rapidly tumbling toward the Four Nations break here, which is semi-related to what we're going to talk about on today's show.
It is indeed, and let's start with the big news, and it's not immediately going to happen, but the NHL is starting to prepare for Gary Bettman's eventual retirement, probably a couple of years away, but this is the first time we're getting some concrete evidence that there's life after Bettman.
I mean, I'll believe it when I see it. I truly believe that man is some sort of immortal or vampire or something, and he will never leave. But in all seriousness, it is fascinating because, he's been around since 1993 as NHL commissioner. That is a very long time. There are grown adults with children who have never known a world without Gary Bettman as the NHL commissioner. And I think, we've talked about him before in kind of evaluating his tenure at this position. And, there's good and bad, right? Yeah. He's done tremendous work with expansion in most cases, but not all. And, there have been the lockouts. But I think that for the most part, people see his influence as positive, right?
Well, look, you got to start with the people who employ him, and that's the owners. And if you compare the revenue of the NHL now to 32 years ago, let's put it this way. If there's an NHL owner anywhere in the same city as Gary Bettman, he will never have to pay for dinner or drinks again because they're going to take care of him because he took care of them. So, I mean, from a purely monetary standpoint, Gary Bettman has helped the National Hockey League grow its income drastically over the last 32 plus years. How he's done it has not always been to the liking of fans. And I'll start with the lockouts. What has there been? 3 lockouts under Bettman?
Yeah,
maybe
4 work stoppages.
Right. 4 work stoppages. At times he'll go scorched earth to get what he wants. We lost an entire NHL season under his leadership, and parts of at least 2 more. So that to me, yes, he got the results, but boy, the fans ended up paying for it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, in their wallets, in their hearts. And I think that, he has had a lot of ebbs and flows and ups and downs in his tenure. And, we've gone through this cycle where it's a thing to boo him at big events, and now he likes it. And it's this weird, like, hate relationship with him in a lot of ways that the fans have. I think the lockouts especially have been a big part of it. But then also, I think you look at cities who have lost teams multiple times, and you look at what happened in Arizona, and I think a lot of that can be put on the league with, Gary Bettman specifically. Like, a lot of people would suggest that it was his ego that kept that organization afloat for so many years and gone through terrible ownership, and he was willing to live with so much just to prove a point about Arizona hockey, right?
That was sort of his baby, the
Mhm.
Arizona Coyotes slash Phoenix
His
Coyotes.
toddler, I would
Yeah,
say.
well, his teenager, I think, by the time we
Yeah,
got done
by
with
the
it, but
time
yeah,
true,
yeah,
true.
I mean, and but however you wanna describe it, that was his pet project, and it ended up not working out. Now we could break down the reasons, but I think even if you take a further step back, I think historically, because Gary Bettman emphasized expanding to the southern and western United States, there has
Mhm.
been a lot of Canadian based fans who have negative feelings about him because he has de emphasized Canada, not expanded to Canada. We've seen a lot of teams leave Canada under his watch. And, yeah, Winnipeg came back, but it
They had
hasn't
to
always.
fight for it.
Yes, yes. So I think there was a certain amount of resentment north of the border with some Canadian hockey fans because of the way Gary Bettman is, I would almost say, taking them for granted in some ways.
In some ways, yeah, I would agree with that, and of course, like, we have the long-suffering Quebec City fans, I think, who probably don't have good things to say about Gary Bettman, and I think that, it has been a fraught tenure for sure, and I think that it in some ways, you look at some organizations that have long time leadership that doesn't change, and it can be a good thing, but I think for the most part, to keep organizations fresh and robust, you do need to have change more often. And I think ultimately, he's been around too long. And you look at some of the criticism of the league as a whole, right? You look at the marketing of the league and the marketing of players that's been behind other leagues, right? In terms of the personality of the league and how they have structured things like the All-Star game, and have they worn outdoor games into the ground? There's like all these things that come up and you're like, well, that kind of leadership comes from the top here, right?
And ironically, Bettman, before he became the commissioner of the NHL, he had worked for the NBA. He was brought in to sort of take some of the marketing ideas that the NBA had and apply them to the
Right.
NHL. And it didn't quite work out that way. uh, the NHL still doesn't really do as good of a job of marketing. Now, there are differences in the way the two sports are played that do factor into that. Uh, but at the same time, there's more that he could do. But here's one thing I think Gary Bettman did very well over the course of his tenure, and I do want to bring it up. The NHL right now, if you compare it to the 70s and the 80s, there are fewer teams now where you get to American Thanksgiving. There used to be like 5, 6, 8 teams where it's early to mid-November and we know their season is over. There is more parity now in the NHL. There are no teams that are going to only lose 10 games in a season and no teams that are going to only win 10, 15 games in a season. Even the bad teams in the NHL right now are not as bad as, let's say, the Colorado Rockies used to be, or the California Golden Seals used to be, where you
Right.
just knew they had no chance before the season started, and you were always right if you guessed that.
Yeah, I think there is more parity in the league. I think, there's still, a little bit of work to be done there, but I think overall the parity has gotten better. I think that, there are conspiracy theorists out there about those Edmonton Oiler lottery picks. But, it hasn't gotten them a Stanley Cup yet either. So
No.
they've gotten close, but not there. So, all of that being said, I think it's better, but there's still work to be done. And I think there's still like the salary cap situation, I think has gotten better, but there's still work to be done as far as making it align with revenues appropriately and not overshooting. Like, I am very concerned about next year's cap, that they're going to overshoot, right? And then there's going to end up being escrow again at some point.
Yeah, well,
But
they did eliminate the escrow, at least for now.
yeah,
So we'll see.
yeah.
We'll see. But I mean, a
That's the
lot of
whole
positive.
reason escrow came into play in the first place, is because they overshot the salary cap
Yeah,
and then COVID happened. So, like, I think, again, better, but work to be done. And I think change is a good thing. And, you know, it seems like, based on what's being said, that he's got maybe 2 to 3 more years tops left in him, right?
right. And that would give the NHL time to pick his successor. And look, it's way too early if we're talking 2 to 3 years down the road to start naming names. But what qualities do you think the NHL should be looking for? What is the biggest quality that Gary Bettman's successor needs to possess to get the league from where they are to closer to where they want to be?
I think, like, the perfect Venn diagram for me is somebody who knows hockey but hasn't been in hockey, if that makes any sense. Like, hasn't been insider guy or insider woman in the sport, as far as like management goes, but also knows the sport and the people really well. And that's a tough assignment, but I really think we need some outside perspective here, but somebody who at least gets the game in a way that maybe Bettman didn't when he came in.
Yeah, he certainly didn't know a lot about hockey when he started. I think obviously that has changed over the last 32
Yeah.
years. But yeah, so life without Bettman on the horizon, and we'll obviously talk more about his legacy when the time actually comes for him to step down. But as we said today, it's a lot of good, a lot of not so good, and it's a complicated legacy, as anybody who's been in power for 32 years is likely to have. We have got a lot more to get to on today's show. Some bad goaltending news for the New Jersey Devils, plus some good goaltending news for the Calgary Flames. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. And one of my favorite things I went to recently using Game Time was a Broadway show. Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I was looking for those tickets to see Wicked, which I haven't seen in a long time, but given the movie, I want to remind myself how it actually ends. So with Game Time Picks, I found amazing deals, could even see the view from my seat before buying. The super deal was particularly impressive. It offers great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
So the New Jersey Devils get some bad injury news about their starting goaltender. And I think this one is not going to help the Devils timing wise and on the ice. Jacob Markstrom now going to miss 4 to 6 weeks due to an MCL sprain. That more or less means he's out until Four Nations, and he may need to be replaced on Sweden's Four Nations roster. But first let's start with New Jersey. How big of a hit is this for the New Jersey Devils?
Yeah, I think it's a huge deal. Obviously, he's their number one goaltender, right? So that's always going to be a hit for a team. And, you look at his stats, he's one of the top goaltenders in the NHL. And he has, on its face, better stats than, his backup, Jake Allen. But I think there's some interesting things going on there as well.
And go ahead, talk about some of those interesting things, because there are, some differences in the way the team plays in front of Jake Allen as compared to Jacob Markstrom.
There really is. And, I'm not really a conspiracy theorist when it comes to teams playing so vastly differently in front of different goaltenders. But, different goaltenders have different styles. And sometimes it warrants that, whether a goalie comes out of their crease more or, is better side to side or, there's all sorts of factors here. But that being said, you look at a per 60 stats for Jake Allen and Jacob Markstrom. Jake Allen is facing 2 shots more per 60 than Jacob Markstrom is. And if you look at high danger shots against, Jake Allen and this is in all situations, right? Jake Allen is facing 7.71 high danger shots against per 60. Jacob Markstrom was only facing 5.84 shots against per 60 that were high danger. So Jake Allen is having to make much more difficult saves overall for the New Jersey Devils than Jacob Markstrom. And so, like, are the Devils going to adjust how they play in order to support Jake Allen here?
Yeah, I mean that's always a question. Look, there are some teams that actually reduce the number of high danger chances when their backup is in because they feel they have to
Yeah.
be more supportive because the backup isn't as good as the starter. It looks like with the Devils so far it's been the opposite, but right now if you look at where the Devils are at in the standings, if they have a big fall off in goal, they could easily fall out of the top 3 in the Metro and be in that big long pack of 8 teams fighting for those 2 wild card spots.
Yeah, and we talked about the Devils specifically last week on the show, coincidentally, and, I had just seen them play up against the Flyers, and, I came to the conclusion that the Devils were good enough, and that's what had been keeping them in that top 3 in the division, but that, they are a very beatable team on a night by night basis, and if they're gonna allow Jake Allen to suffer out there facing much more difficult shots, which that's something the Devils will do when you watch them play and their defensive style, like, that could be trouble for them.
It could be. And it certainly is sort of opening this door where, yeah, first of all, Jake Allen is going to have to step up, but the Devils
Yeah.
as a team are going to have to step up in front of Jake Allen. And
Yes.
do you think they adjust their style of play now over the next 4 to 6 weeks in order to sort of compensate for this change in goal?
I mean, they have to. That's the thing, is that they have to look at this and be like, "We can't leave Jake Allen out to dry here." I think, the fact that Jake Allen also is facing shots that are closer to him than Jacob Markstrom, if you look at average shot distance
Right.
between them, that clearly shows a difference in play, right? So, and what shots they're allowing defensively. So there absolutely is going to have to be a change.
Yeah, and we'll see if they can make that adjustment and keep on winning because, like I said, there's not a lot of margin for error right now in the Metro and in the Eastern Conference playoff race. Also, got to talk about Four Nations. If his spot is in danger, Sweden's got a few issues in goal right now with injuries.
Yeah, they do. So, we already have Olmark out, and now that Markstrom is out, there is going to have to be, some changes to that roster. Now, there is reporting out of Sweden from Per Bjurman suggesting that Sam Ersson from the Flyers is absolutely the next man up here as far as being added to the roster. It seems like that's a lock now that he's going to be on the roster with both of those Swedish goaltenders out. Now the question becomes, is Sam Ersson going to get game time?
Yeah. Is he going to get game time? And then do they need a third goalie also to fill in, depending on how long both Markstrom and Olmark are out of the lineup?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. It'll be interesting to see who that is because I think it gets a little murky after Sam Ersson, right?
Yeah, I mean, do they go Marcus Hogberg of the Islanders, who spent most of the season in the AHL and has played really well in limited
He
opportunities
has.
since he's come up? But, you know, before the season started, he was viewed as a fringe NHL goalie by most scouts.
Yeah, but again, like, he's playing well, and if he's the 3rd goalie that isn't gonna play, like, okay, give it to him as, like, an
Yeah,
honor,
yeah.
right?
Why not? Why not? He would make sense. And there aren't a lot of other Swedish goalies out there in the NHL waiting to fill that spot.
Yeah, not at the moment, but, I think you look at the, the options here, like, Philip Gustafson obviously is the guy now, right?
Right. He's
And
number one.
so they'll play him without a doubt. It's just, will Samerson get a game
Right.
in the tournament? But I think that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, I think that is kind of where we're at, and we'll see if it changes between now and the tournament, which is what, about 2.5 weeks away. So we're closing in
Mhm.
on that break and on that tournament very, very quickly. We'll see how that goes. We have got more to get to on today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. While the Devils got some bad news about goaltending, how about what the job Dustin Wolf is doing for Calgary? We'll talk about that and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. And hockey fans, you could use your knowledge of hockey and your favorite team to find some exciting opportunities on FanDuel. Just visit fanduel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's fanduel.com. FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So the Calgary Flames have been getting some really good goaltending from Dustin Wolf. He may even be up for Calder Trophy consideration. And Jess Belmosto of Locked On Flames has a little bit to say about the way Wolf has been playing.
It's time to start putting some respect on Dustin Wolf's name in these Calder Trophy conversations. Night after night, he shows up big, whether it is with saves or just the technique. He is there when it matters the most for the Flames. He went into tonight's game against the Buffalo Sabres with a .917 save percentage and looks only better after tonight's game, where the Flames were absolutely outshot by the Sabres, but were able to come out on top with a 5-2 win. Truly, thank you to Dustin Wolf. So let's start talking about it, because this kid is legit.
Dustin Wolf is legit. You look at the numbers: 17 wins, 7 losses, 2 overtime losses, a 2.49 goals against average, a .918 save percentage, and a pair of shutouts. And, I guess the big contrast is this. You look at Dustin Wolf's numbers, you look at his backup, Dan Vladar's numbers, there is a huge gap in both the statistics and the wins and losses when Dustin Wolf is in between the
Yeah.
pipes for Calgary.
Yeah, he is an absolute difference maker for the Calgary Flames. And, I think there's some interesting questions to be asked about Dustin Wolf and Calder voting, right? And right now, I'm not 100% sold that he should win the Calder, but he should be up there in the conversation. And I feel like that's sorely lacking at this point in the season. I think we hear Celebrini, we hear a little Mitchkov, we hear Hudson, But we're not hearing Dustin Wolf in any of these conversations. And I think it's time that we talk about him a little more. My co-host on Locked On Flyers, Russ Cohen, has been going to bat for this kid for like months now. So I am partially doing this on his behalf. But, I think of the goalies who have played 15 or more games this season so far, he's fifth in save percentage and 13th in goals against average. That is pretty darn good. Like, and you could say, well, this is technically his third NHL season. We have gone down this road with other rookies. I'm air quoting for those just listening right now. But like, I think eligibility is eligibility. He's on the list. So let's just go with that and move forward, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are standards and rules that set out who's eligible. He meets the criteria. And obviously, yes, this is his third season being on an NHL roster, but how many games has he played? How
Hmm.
much time has he spent actually on the ice during games that, he's still eligible for the Calder Trophy? And so you got to include him in your considerations if you're looking at the big picture. And, it's sort of unfair in some ways for goalies because you're comparing apples to oranges. There's no direct comparison statistically where you could say, oh, yeah, a goalie with a 2.49 goals against average and a 918 save percentage is better than a left wing with 27 goals and 25 assists. It's a little tricky to make that comparison.
It is. And, what do? I go back and look at other goalies who have won the Calder, right? And so the last time it happened was 2008, 2009 with Steve Mason.
Wow.
And yeah, long time ago, Steve Mason, I think, and Marty Brodeur won the Calder, by the way, back in the day too.
Yeah.
Ed Belfour won the Calder, Tom Barrasso won the Calder. Like, so these are like big names, right? But then you have also Andrew Raycroft won the Calder. Did we hear much from him after that?
No.
Not so much. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who turns into the superstar of all superstar goaltenders. It's what'd you do in your Calder eligible year, right?
Right.
So, but with Steve Mason, he was 10th in the NHL in games played overall in his rookie year, right? 16th in save percentage, 44th in goals against average, which is below league average, by the way, at 2.29, still won the Calder. Now, what set him apart that year? He had a magical year where he had 10 shutouts
Yeah. Yeah.
in that year, right? If we recall, he was also fourth in voting for the Hart Trophy that year and second in the voting for Vezina that year. So I think that was a magical year for Columbus. Steve Mason was a huge, huge part of it. And I think there was a lot of things conflating to get Steve Mason uplifted and win that Calder that year far and above, right? And that does not exist for Dustin Wolf in the context of the Calgary Flames. There isn't like some magical thing happening. He has 2 shutouts, a little past halfway in the season, not even close to the 5 that would be half of Steve Mason's season,
Right.
right? So, and I think Steve Mason will have ended up playing more games than Dustin Wolf will by the end of this season. So, like, we can't even compare those two at this point.
No. But what if Dustin Wolf is able to get the Calgary Flames into the playoffs? How big of an impact does that have? Because before the season, nobody was picking the Calgary Flames to make or very few people were picking the Calgary Flames to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of it, right? And I think that's part of what uplifted Steve Mason to some
Yeah.
degree. I mean, amazing goaltender that year, and in future years, I might suggest as well. But I think, like, I just feel like Wolf has been so unheralded in all of this, and it's just time. Like, he should be in that top 3 conversation for the Calder this year, and he has not been.
Yeah, I think it's time to give him consideration. And, even if he doesn't win it, if he keeps playing the way he's playing, he should be strongly considered as a finalist. And we'll see whether or not that ends up happening. Well, that is going to do it for us. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from our hosts, Steele and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Gil Martin. I will be back on Monday with 3 of our local hosts talking about the biggest stories from around the league. On behalf of Rachel Donner, I want to thank everyone for watching and listening to the Locked On NHL podcast. Have a great weekend, everyone. Don't forget, we're back tomorrow with our women's hockey spotlight, so check that out with Erica Elayala. Have a great weekend, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.